Have you ever felt a silence so deep it said everything you needed to hear? One cold morning in Red Hollow. A weathered rancher named Clint Mercer stopped to buy feed and left with something far more unexpected. A young woman, barefoot, said to be deaf, sold by a drunk for the price of a horse. She never begged, never cried. She just looked at him, steady, calm, like she knew the weight he carried. What would you do if someone who couldn't speak somehow understood you better than anyone ever had in a town where whispers travel faster than snowmelt? Kindness comes with suspicion, and silence is often mistaken for weakness. But as winter deepens, and secrets buried in the land begin to stir, Clint faces a choice: protect a girl the town calls strange, or lose the only person who's ever truly listened. If you've ever been misunderstood, judged too quickly, or longed for connection beyond words, this story is for you. Settle in. Let your heart lean closer. This is the kind of quiet that echoes. The snow that morning fell soft over Red Hollow, not enough to stick, but enough to slow the walk from his truck to the auction yard. Clint pulled the collar of his coat higher, one hand curled around a small paper bag of sugar cubes he'd picked up from the diner, the other jammed deep in his jacket pocket. Across the yard, someone had set up a crackling speaker, playing Christmas songs from another decade's oft static between lines of "It's the most wonderful time of the year." He passed Ethel McKay's porch, where wind chimes clinked against the rail, then the diner, warm and bright inside with its regulars folks, clutching styrofoam coffee cups, nodding between bites of egg sandwiches, their voices muffled by window glass. A tip jar on the counter swelled with crumpled bills and candy canes. Clint nodded to no one in particular and kept moving. The auction was already thinning by the time he reached the last pen. A few horses remained, some goats, and a lean bay mare with ribs like slats on a worn picket fence. She stood alone, one leg slightly bent, head drooped. Beside her stood a girl barely more than 20 by the look of her, hair in need of a brush. Coat 2 sizes too big and patched with thread. She wasn't talking. She wasn't even blinking, just watching. The man next to her swayed where he stood, a half-empty bottle swinging from one gloved hand. In the other, he held a rope, not tied to the mare. To the girl. Quiet one. This, the drunk muttered too loudly. Deaf. Dumb. Both maybe. Good for chores, though. Cleaned up my cabin real fine before I ran out of patience. Someone behind Clint chuckled, low and sour. Another spat near the snow. Clint's boots crunched forward. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at the mare, then at the girl. Her eyes found his, steady and unreadable. No fear, no plea. Just presence. The same kind of presence that Clint felt on those wide December mornings, when the frost bit deep, but the wind didn't stir. He had known silence since his wife passed. This girl knew a different kind. The drunk staggered toward him. Horse is 30. Girl comes with. Ain't dragging her back again. Ain't worth the firewood she burns. Clint didn't answer. He reached into his coat, pulled out enough cash to cover the horse, maybe a little more. The man squinted, shrugged, and let the rope fall. The mare snorted, one ear flicking toward Clint. The girl didn't move. You buying livestock, or company someone called from behind, laughter sharp against the cold. Still silent, Clint took the rope from the ground, unfastened it from the girl's wrist, and coiled it loosely. He opened the gate and started toward the truck. Hoofsteps followed, soft, slow, deliberate. When he reached the passenger door, he heard it open behind him. Not the creak of hinges, but the muted shift of someone climbing up and settling in. He waited a moment before starting the engine. Snow flurried past the windshield, catching light from a gas station sign across the street. He didn't look at her. She didn't look at him. At the diner, folks paused mid-sip. One man tipped his hat without meeting Clint's eyes. The woman behind the counter offered no wave. Clint turned left onto Main, then south onto the gravel road that would lead him home. The ride passed in near silence. Only the heater's low hum and the occasional rattle of the feed bags in the back broke it. When they reached the ranch, Clint parked by the barn. He stepped out first, opened the passenger door, but the girl was already down, boots crunching softly behind him. She followed as he led the mare to the stable, moving with the quiet grace of someone used to not being noticed. Inside, he handed her a blanket. She took it without a word and made her way to the cabin porch, while he finished checking on the animals. When he returned, she was seated on the floor beside the fire, shoes off, toes tucked into the hem of her coat. Her fingers played absently with a frayed thread. Clint made 2 mugs of coffee. He didn't ask if she drank it. He just set it down. He watched her wrap her hands around the cup. She didn't sip, but she held it like it meant something. Later, while he cleaned up the stove, he heard the soft shuffle of her moving toward the front window. Outside, the snow had stopped. Frost layered the glass in delicate, curling patterns. That night, she presses her fingers to the frosted window, listening to a silence Clint can't hear. She didn't say a word, but her presence filled every quiet corner of the cabin. The fire was already going when Clint came downstairs the next morning. Embers snapped softly under a fresh log, and the room held the gentle scent of cedar and damp wool. His eyes drifted to the hearth where 2 pairs of socks hung over the grate, steaming faintly. The second pair wasn't his. Lena moved lightly in the kitchen, her back to him, placing cans from the pantry onto the counter in neat rose beans. Peaches, flour. She didn't seem to notice him watching, or maybe she did and didn't mind. Her motion was quiet, not rushed, like someone used to keeping noise to herself. Clint cleared his throat lightly. "Mornin'." She glanced back, nodded once, then returned to sorting the dry goods. He stepped around her, reaching for the coffee pot on the stove. Steam curled from its spout, and he poured 2 cups. Without looking, he set one beside her on the counter. She didn't reach for it, not right away, just turned her head slightly, as if memorizing the gesture. There was something about her stillness, not empty, not cautious, intentional. He remembered his wife once saying, over a silent dinner during one of his quiet moods, "Stillness speaks louder when you're willing to listen." After breakfast, he stepped outside to check the fence line while Lena stayed behind. When he returned, she had stacked kindling by the stove, scrubbed the tin mugs, and was folding a dish towel with slow, precise movements. Her coat hung by the door, the sleeves damp at the cuffs, suggesting she'd fetched water from the pump too. On the table, near the hearth, she had placed a different mug chipped, blue-rimmed, with faint, hand-painted flowers near the lip. It hadn't been used in years. It had belonged to May, Clint's wife. He stared at it for a moment before sitting down. She noticed, but she didn't flinch or explain. She just poured cocoa into it and slid it gently his way. Then she poured her own and took a seat across from him. No words passed. None were needed. Later that afternoon, Clint brought out a notepad and set it on the table beside a pencil. "You can write, if you'd rather," he said gently. Lena looked at it, then at him. Her fingers brushed the edge of the pad once, then she pushed it softly aside and picked up the dish towel again. Her message was clear. She didn't need it, or didn't want it, either way. He didn't press. Outside. Frost clung to the window glass in thin spirals, catching the light like silver thread. Clint stepped onto the porch, glancing toward the barn where the mare stood. The girl was already there. She wasn't brushing the horse, not exactly standing beside it. Her hand moving in a slow rhythm down its side, fingers spreading slightly, like she was reading the animal through her palm. The mare, usually jumpy, stood still, eyes half-lidded, breathing deep. Clint didn't interrupt. He watched a moment longer, then walked back toward the house, snow crunching underfoot. That evening, the fire burned low as Lena sat near it, her hands curled around Mai's mug. Clint washed the dishes, folded the same flannel shirt he always wore on Mondays, and placed it on the edge of the armchair. A small rhythm was forming, nothing spoken, but present. When he returned to the kitchen for a final check, he saw it. A scrap of paper, resting by the stove. Words shaky but clear in careful script. "Thank you." He didn't pick it up, just looked at it a long time, then turned the kettle back on, slow and quiet. The room had dimmed to shadow when he came back with the mugs. Lena hadn't moved from the fire, eyes fixed on the flames, her face soft in the glow. Her fingers were moving. He watched, puzzled, as she made a shape in the air. A flick of the wrist. Then her hand curved near her heart. It wasn't random. It looked like something spoken without voice. Lena stares at the fire that night, then signs a word with her hand. He doesn't know what it means. The calf didn't limp until after she walked into the barn and she saw it first. Clint had just swung the barn doors open to let in some pale morning light when Lena slipped past him, moving like a shadow through rising steam and warm hay. The snowstorm had blanketed everything 2 nights before, and now the sun was melting it in long drips from the eaves, leaving the air inside thick and sweet. The young calf stood stiff-legged near the back stall, huffing softly, one hind leg trembling. Clint hadn't noticed it on his last check, but Lena did. She crouched without a word, ran her palm gently down its flank, and paused at the knee. He watched her from the barn door, arms crossed, one eyebrow lifted. She didn't look up, just pressed gently around the joint, then stood and walked briskly back toward the cabin. Clint followed, boots thudding across packed snow. By the time he returned to the kitchen, after feeding the hens, Lena had already boiled water and was stirring something into a small jar-dried leaves. Ground fine. He recognized the scent before he saw the contents. Yarrow, old ranch remedy. His wife had used it once on a mule's infection. He sniffled. Cold air clung longer this time of year. Lena glanced over, set another pinch of yarrow into a second mug, and added a twist of honey. She placed it near the stove, then motioned with her chin toward the steaming cup. Clint took it, watching her with that same guarded glance he reserved for things he couldn't name. That afternoon, Ethel McKay's green truck rattled down the path. She didn't get out right away, just watched from the driver's seat. Clint went to greet her, leaning on the fence. "You've got company," she said, not smiling. "Folks been talking?" "Folks always talk," Clint said, voice low. "She ain't said a word since she got here. Clint, she works, she listens." "That's more than most." Ethel's eyes narrowed. "She don't listen like us." Clint said nothing. Lena appeared at the stable door just then, wiping her hands on a cloth, calm and steady. The calf stood beside her, bandaged, moving easier already. Ethel left without another word. Later, Clint sat on the porch, rolling a toothpick between his fingers. Lena was brushing the mare again, her strokes patient, even. He watched the animal respond, not flinch, not step away, just lean slightly into the pressure of her hand. It was uncanny, and it bothered him. That evening, as the wind picked up, Clint moved through the barn for one last check. The light was low, a lantern flickering on a nail. He was halfway down the row when he stopped short. Lena knelt near the stall door, her eyes closed, one palm pressed flat against the dirt floor. Her other hand rested gently on her lap. She wasn't praying. She wasn't resting. She was listening. The wood creaked overhead as a gust of wind blew through the loft vent. Somewhere outside, a branch clattered against the side of the house. Clint stayed quiet, watching her from the shadows, unsure what to feel, wonder, or worry. She didn't open her eyes until he stepped back, his boot catching a loose board. Even then, she only turned her head slightly, acknowledged his presence without surprise. He didn't ask what she was doing. He didn't really want to know. After dinner, he returned to the kitchen for his nightly cup of hot water with lemon. The room was still warm from the stew pot. The flannel shirt he folded every Tuesday lay across the armrest, untouched. Near the door, she had written something new on the small chalkboard that hung from a nail. She writes on the chalkboard, "Storm coming." But the sky is clear. Red Hollow wasn't cruel. Just small and small places fill silence with suspicion. On Friday morning, Lena walked into the diner alone. Clint had stayed behind to mend a fence post. She needed flour, maybe sugar, and she moved down the boardwalk with cautious, deliberate steps. Inside the diner, the bell over the door gave a familiar ding. The air smelled like turkey pot pie and reheated coffee. Boots shuffled under tables. Steam curled from cups. Behind the counter, someone laughed, but it trailed off when Lena stepped in. She didn't head straight to the register. She paused, scanning the chalkboard menu. It was the same as yesterday, coffee with refills, a slice of pie for $1, soup on weekends. But she read it anyway, or maybe just gave herself time to adjust. At a corner booth, a young mother stood. Her toddler looked up from his coloring page, bright eyes, curious. The woman reached down, took his hand, and gently guided him behind her, closer to the window. She didn't say anything cruel, just made space, too much space. Lena paid with coins and a crumpled 5, nodding once to the cashier, who barely nodded back. Outside, the wind caught the corner of her scarf and tugged it loose. She tucked it back in place without looking up and walked the long way around to the grocery porch. From the steps of the sheriff's office, Deputy Roy leaned against the railing, coffee in one hand, the other resting near his belt. He watched her for a moment, then squinted toward the hills. Later that day, he found Clint near the feed shed. "She don't talk." "Huh?" Roy said, voice dry. "Nope. Don't make noise. Don't ask for nothin'. Just watches." Clint kept sorting nails into an old tobacco tin, not bothering to answer. Roy went on. "Some say she talks to the ground, kneels in barns, listens to trees." Clint's hand paused over the tin. "She helps. That calf's leg healed quick. Mare's calmer, too." Roy sipped his coffee. "That ain't the point. Just watch yourself. People around here get nervous easy. Especially when someone don't explain themselves." "I don't explain myself much either," Clint muttered. Roy gave a slow shrug. "Yeah. And they talk about you, too." By Sunday, whispers hung in the air like early frost. At the White Chapel, the pastor's sermon barely held attention. Ethel McKay sat in the third pew, gloves folded in her lap, gaze drifting from the pulpit to the back corner, where Lena stood, just outside the door. She wasn't inside, just near, close enough to hear, not close enough to be seen. After service, Ethel lingered by the coat rack. My niece, she said quietly to no one in particular, went silent one winter, after a loss, never quite came back. Someone murmured a polite sound. Ethel didn't say more. She stepped outside, nodded once to Lena, who nodded back, then continued down the gravel path home. That night, Clint and Lena ate in near silence. The stew was thick with potatoes and onion, the bread warm from the oven. She didn't look up much, but when he offered the butter dish, she took it with care. After dishes. Clint sat by the fire, rubbing the worn edges of a book he wasn't reading. Lena stood near the window, her hands lightly folded. Then she moved toward the shelf, picked up the small framed photo that had sat there for years. Anna May in a garden hat, laughing, one hand raised as if waving off the camera. She held it for a long time. Clint said nothing. She walked slowly to the porch, stood still with the picture held against her chest. Snow hadn't started again, but the air had the taste of it. He could hear the wood creak under her feet, even from the living room. He stood, stepped halfway to the door, but didn't open it. She returned a few minutes later. The photo was back on the shelf, right where it had been. No fingerprints on the glass. She places the photo back, gently, then signs something against him, as before. Clint thought he was dreaming until he heard her say, "I'm sorry." The wind had picked up not long after midnight. It scraped along the edges of the cabin like fingertips over an old fiddle, pulling at shutters, tapping loose tin on the barn roof. Clint shifted under his quilt, eyes still closed, the kind of half-sleep where memories wander and uninvited. May stood by the gate in his dream, the one with the broken hinge that always stuck in winter. She wore her red flannel and that wide straw hat, the one she claimed made her look like trouble. She waved once, turned, and walked toward the field, but the wheat was gone, replaced by snow, stretching far and quiet. He woke suddenly. The room held only firelight and shadows. His mouth was dry. Then he heard it. Faint, careful. "I'm sorry." Clint sat up, heart thumping. The words hung in the still air, so soft he wasn't sure if they came from the wind or something closer. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and pulled on his sweater, the one May had patched 3 winters ago. The living room glowed dimly from the hearth. Logs had settled, one collapsing into another with a soft thunk, sending sparks curling up the flue. On the rug in front of the fire, Lena sat cross-legged. She didn't turn as he entered. In her lap rested the photo frame. Mai's face looked out from it, grainy and sunlit. Clint stood for a moment, not sure what to say, or if he should say anything. Then Lena spoke again. She was kind, like you. Her voice was low, uneven, like something not used often, or maybe carefully stored. He stepped closer, knees cracking, as he knelt beside her. I thought she looked at him now, the same calm in her expression she always wore, but softer, a little braver, maybe. "You can talk," she nodded once, slow. "Why now?" he asked, not accusing, just hollow. She held the photo a little tighter before answering. "Because you finally listened." He didn't know what to do with the quiet after that. The room had weight to it now, not heavy, not harsh, just full of the kind of silence that wasn't empty. The fire popped, the wind sighed, a kettle whistled softly from where it had been forgotten on the stove. Clint rose slowly, poured water over old leaves, brought back 2 mugs. They sat there for a long time. No more words passed, but none were needed. Eventually, Lena placed the photo back on the shelf. She touched the frame once, then turned. As she moved to leave the room, Clint reached out gently, his hand brushing hers, not grasping, just touching, like asking. Clint takes her hand. She doesn't pull away. By dawn, the snow was knee-deep and the Miller boy was gone. The sun had not yet fully risen when Clint stepped onto his porch and saw the pale blue of worry already settling over Red Hollow. Tracks crisscrossed the snow like spider legs boots, hooves. A few small dog prints, but one set stopped at the tree line behind the chapel and didn't come back. The Miller boy, just 7, had gone out early to break ice off the chicken coop latch. He hadn't returned. By the time the town bell rang once, long and low, half the men were gathered near the chapel, bundled in mismatched scarves and fur-lined coats, their breath puffing like steam. Deputy Roy barked orders, split into pairs. Take the South Ridge first. We'll sweep the East Woods after no one moved quite yet. Panic makes people slow. Pastor Willard stood near the chapel steps, fingers wringing his hat. His voice trembled as he said, "Lord, help us find the boy." Clint came up behind Lena, who hadn't joined the circle. She stared out toward the frost-rimmed forest, one glove tucked into her pocket, the other in her hand. Without a word, she knelt, palms down, one against the snow, the other hovering just above it. Some watched, most ignored her. Roy muttered, "Not now," but Lena stood, turned east, and started walking. No hesitation, no request, just motion. Clint followed, the woods muffled sound, trees leaned close, branches dripping soft meltwater. Their boots broke crusted snow, leaving clean tracks behind. Lena didn't stop to check the ground. She didn't veer off to guess. She moved as if she already knew. Clint watched her shoulders, relaxed, purposeful, as if she could hear something under the hush. They crossed a narrow creek, frozen at the edges. Snow deepened in the low gulch just beyond it. Clint's thighs ached with the climb, but Lena didn't slow. At the top of the ridge, they paused. Clint inhaled sharply, where now Lena tilted her head slightly, then stepped into a thicket of cedar, the branches low and tangled. He heard it before he saw, a whimper, soft, hoarse, under a bent tree limb, cradled in the hollow formed by snow and roots. The boy lay curled, red-cheeked and wide-eyed. His gloves were gone, his jacket soaked, but he was breathing. Lena knelt first, checked his hands, his pulse, then wrapped her scarf around his shoulders. Clint lifted the boy gently. By the time they returned to the clearing, the rest of the search party had reached the far slope. Roy froze, mid-step. Pastor Willard dropped his hat. "She found him," someone whispered. Clint didn't answer. Pastor Willard fell to his knees. Roy muttered, how Clint looked at Lena. She doesn't speak, just points to the wind. It started with a tin of cookies on the porch and a knitted scarf on the fence. Clint nearly stepped on the scarf coming out to feed the hens. It was red, thick, and looped carefully over the gate post, still holding the warmth of whoever had left it. On the porch sat a small tin wrapped in gingham ribbon, the lid slightly askew. Inside molasses cookies, soft and sugared. Lena stood just inside the doorway, holding 2 mugs of cider. She didn't smile, but she tilted her head at the offerings, as if puzzled by the ritual. Clint picked up the tin, glanced toward the road. No footprints. Looks like someone's thanking you. That afternoon, more arrived. A jar of apple preserves on the steps, a bundle of pine sprigs tied with a bow near the woodshed, a note tucked under the door that read, simply, "Grateful." At the general store, word had spread faster than the frost line. The Miller boy was fine, just a little chilled, and everyone remembered who had found him. She saved that boy. Someone whispered at the post office, just walked right to him like she knew. Ethel McKay came by before noon with 2 paperback books in a canvas bag. "Herbal remedies," she said, setting them on the porch rail without stepping inside. "Thought the girl might like to read, or whatever it is she does." Lena nodded in thanks, then brought out a thermos of hot cider and left it on the rail where Ethel had stood. When Clint checked later, it was gone, and so was the canvas bag. Tom Weaver arrived the next morning, limping from the cold and clutching his shoulder. "Chopped wood wrong," he grunted. "Froze up tight." Clint offered him a seat by the stove, but Tom glanced past him to where Lena stood in the corner, grinding dried calendula into a small tin. "She helps, don't she?" Clint stepped aside. Lena didn't ask questions. She simply pointed to a stool and motioned for Tom to sit. Then she unwrapped the scarf from his shoulder and began applying the salve, fingers quick but gentle. Tom winced, then sighed. "Warm," he said. She handed him a clean rag and moved on. Later that day, a neighbor's daughter came by with her terrier in tow. The dog skittered across the porch, yapping and pulling at the leash. The girl frowned, helpless. Lena stepped forward, crouched low, and held out her hand. No sudden moves, just a steady breath and open palm. The terrier stopped barking, then, slowly, padded toward her. The girl gasped. "He never comes to anyone." Clint said nothing, just watched as Lena pressed her fingers to the dog's chest, then to her own. That evening, as the sky burned orange and the fire crackled low, Clint found Ethel McKay on the porch again. She wore thick mittens and carried a lemon loaf wrapped in wax paper. "I've been stubborn," she said, not looking at him. Thought maybe she was unnatural. Clint didn't respond. "She's not." Inside, Lena stood by the window. Ethel met her eyes through the glass. "You're not what I expected," Ethel said. Lena lifted her hand, fingers moving slowly. She signs back. "Neither are you." Not all stories are told with words. Some are shaped in flour, firewood, and hands. The morning began with cinnamon, not the spice itself, but the memory of it. Clint opened the old hope chest at the foot of the guest bed, the one May had filled with quilts, letters, and pieces of herself. Inside, wrapped in yellowed linen, was a small hardback book, Basic American Sign Language. The edges were worn. A paper scrap marked the page for home. May had always wanted to learn, just in case. "Never know who might come into your life," she once said, folding laundry. Clint ran his hand across the cover, then carried it to the kitchen. Lena stood by the stove, stirring oatmeal. Her back was to him, but she paused when she felt his presence. He set the book on the table. Spine up, she turned, looked at it, then at him. He tapped the page that said home. She smiled, just slightly, and nodded. That afternoon, they sat by the window while the snow drifted gently outside, silent as feathers. She turned the pages for him, her fingers steady, eyes warm. They practiced together, slow, careful. "Home. Thank you. Stay." His hands were stiff at first, but she guided them, pressing his fingers into shape, correcting gently. When he fumbled, she didn't laugh. She waited. The side room off the kitchen became something else. Clint cleared space. brought in an old rocker and small table. Lena folded a quilt over the back of the chair. In the evenings, they sat there in low light, the fire's flicker casting shadows of their hands on the walls. They talked that way about little things: soup, wind, the stars. He learned to watch her eyes more than her mouth, to wait for the movement of her hands before responding, to feel quiet, not fill it. One night, while sleet tapped gently at the windows, Clint moved his fingers carefully, awkwardly, then again, with more surety. "You make this place full." Lena looked at him for a long time. Then she stepped closer, lifted one hand, and placed two fingers softly on his lips. Her touch was feather-light, warm. Then she signed, "You listen. Some stories aren't buried. They're carved into trees and fences." The envelope came quiet. No return address. Clint found it wedged in the screen door, half damp from snowmelt. Inside, a short note in stiff cursive. "This land's story ain't all yours. Ask the preacher." He didn't show it to Lena, not at first. That afternoon, he drove to the chapel, tires crunching along the thawing gravel. Pastor Willard stood by the woodpile, sleeves rolled, splitting logs with a rhythm, slow and sure. Clint held up the letter. Willard didn't ask questions, just nodded toward the bench under the bell tower. "Long time ago," the pastor said, sitting beside him. "Before your father's claim, this land was home to a dozen families, ranchers, natives, a few from the old mining camps. Then came rail lines, new boundaries, bad paper." Clint didn't interrupt. "They didn't leave gentle." Willard added, "Some were pushed, some vanished, and my father." Clint asked. Willard shrugged. Did what men did back then. Took what was left, built fences. Back home, Clint stood a long while at the edge of the pasture. Snow had melted in patches, leaving muddy earth and browned grass. He remembered the fence posts his father had driven in with blistered hands. Remembered the words once muttered in frustration: "This land wasn't always ours." That night, he told Lena everything. She didn't respond, just listened. The next morning, she beckoned him silently, gloves in hand, scarf wrapped tight, and led him into the woods behind the north slope. The sun shone through thinning clouds. Birds returned in bursts of song, branches dripping from thaw. They walked a long while, boots squelching in soft earth, until they reached a clearing where 3 trees stood close together. On the middle trunk, names were carved, faded, some nearly lost to bark, but still there. Micah, Etta, Jonah, 1896. Lena stepped back, let Clint run his fingers over the indentations. "They were here," he whispered, "before us." She nodded, then reached out and signed, "You didn't take it. But you can keep it right." The breeze shifted. A branch above dropped a wet plop of snow onto Clint's shoulder. He didn't flinch. He looked at the names one more time, then placed his hand on the tree. "Then we stay." On Christmas Eve, Red Hollow lit candles for the ones who listen. Snow fell soft that afternoon, as if the sky itself understood silence. By dusk, the chapel windows glowed golden. Flickers dancing behind frosted panes. Lanterns lined the path to the front steps, each one lit by a family, a neighbor, a pair of small hands. Inside, pews filled slowly, no chatter, just the rustle of coats, the creak of wood under careful steps. At the far end, Lena sat with the children, half a dozen wide eyes, mittened hands, and shy glances. One boy leaned close, fingers moving slow. "Thank you," she answered with a smile and a sign of her own. The boy beamed. Clint stood near the front, holding an old leather-bound journal. The pastor nodded for him to speak. Clint didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He opened to a page worn at the edges. My wife, he said, used to write things she didn't say out loud. A few heads bowed. She wrote this one on a December night, years ago. He read, "The best kind of love is quiet. It waits, it listens, it learns, it stays." He paused. The fire behind the altar hissed gently. Clint's voice thickened. She ended it with 4 words. Love. Listens. He closed the book. No one clapped. No one moved. Stillness held the room, not empty, but full. Outside, the wind moved through pine boughs with a hush like a lullaby. Church bells rang once, far off, and candles flickered in the windows as people left slowly, nodding gently, words no longer needed. Clint offered Lena his arm. They walked back along the ridge path, boots crunching fresh snow. Lights twinkled from porch eaves in the distance, from town. Faint music drifted piano keys and an old carol, cracked with age. At the top of the hill, near the barn, Lena stopped. The moon spilled silver on the roofline, and breath steamed between them. She turned, took his hand, pressed it to her chest, just over her heart. He felt it warm, steady. Sure, her lips moved. I don't need sound, just you. Clint nods, tears forming. I hear you, always have. On that quiet Christmas Eve, no words were needed, just the weight of glances, the hush of snow, and hands that remembered how to hold grace. In a town once hesitant, kindness had crept in through back doors and porch railings, until even the most doubtful hearts softened. Sometimes, the loudest truths are spoken by those who never raise their voice, like a candle flickering in a window. A simple act of compassion can light the way through the darkest turns. If this story touched your heart, perhaps today is the day to listen, not with ears, but with the quiet patience of your soul. Thank you for spending time with this story. It means more than you know. If it touched your heart, please consider liking the video, sharing it with someone who might need it, and subscribing to Wild West Echoes. Every click helps us keep these quiet, powerful stories alive.